Yeah, Vincent. I'm one of the liver and pancreas surgeons at the Westmead Hospital. I just check, I'll go to 4 MDTs, and I'm still failing to make some of them work. But there's one is working quite well.
Okay. I think you've been introduced, haven't you? So maybe just Nirmala?
Turned on.
That should be on, yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Nirmala Pathmanathan. I'm the director of the Westmead Breast Cancer Institute, and I'm a pathologist, and I have been to many, many MDTs in my time. Yeah.
So thanks. So I guess what we wanted to really talk about today was slightly different from the normal discussion about how do you make an MDT just kind of function. It's how do you make it go to that next level. And I think, Barbara, that I'm really interested kind of where you're getting to. I think, Emily, you kind of started that process, and whilst you're doing a PhD, I think what happened anyway, maybe that's just accelerated it. So, I mean, for me, I'm particularly interested in how MDTs really lead to, I mean, it's not just research output, it's involved in actual implementation, and, should an MDT actually understand the whole population that surrounds it and actually be responsible for maintaining the group of people that surround the MDT, so who's not coming into service, and that whole kind of service management side as well. And I guess that's what we really wanted to talk about, what are the tools that you need to actually kind of get to that. So it's both kind of, it's research, but not your classic clinical trials research, it's actually being involved in the whole, that's part of it, but it's involved in the whole research right through implementation. And then actually also involved in general quality improvement. I mean, I guess the first question I'd ask, if you're assessing a bit, is that the role for the MDT? I mean, should the MDT be doing more than just looking at the 12 patients that come through and doing that very well?
I think this is quite an important question to resolve, and I've just come back from the American Thoracic meeting. We're at a data session. One of the American speakers from MD Anderson raised the question of whether, and this was in the context of national cancer databases, he does a lot of work with the Acquire registry and the SEER registry, whether in fact the aim of registries, which might be a bit distinct from MDT databases, whether the aim of registries should be national coverage or whether it should be random sampling to be representative because of the resources required to do the national coverage, and maybe random sampling is adequately representative. And that debate wasn't resolved during the session. If the question is whether MDTs should have very broad reach in their local population, I think that needs to be robustly debated. And I think my ideas about what an MDT should do have changed over time. When I first started our database, I tried to be very comprehensive, and we pulled in PDFs of letters and did all that duplication I mentioned. And over time, partly I think because of logistics and practicalities, but also thinking it through in terms of data practice, we've narrowed down and continue through the PhD to narrow down what we collect to avoid duplication. So I think there needs to be some care about broadening the scope of the MTT too much. I think we should think about what is the purpose of the MDT. For me, it's the clinician data interface, and refine it to work that interface really well. Because there's a lot of data collection strategies, there's a lot of ways that data moves around the landscape. And I don't think the MDT or any particular data source should try and be too omnipotent, if that makes any sense.
It does. I mean, I guess the thing for me is though that the team should maybe have the team can have a broader brief than just looking at the 12 patients that come across. And I think this is what's happening, isn't it, in Queensland?
Yes.
And I think you'll certainly start to take in that team much, you've got such good data, you'll start to look more broadly.
Yeah. And I find that I also was involved very heavily with the head and neck clinic at the Royal Brisbane, and they always had a education and research component going back to the early 90s, and I've also found that it's not so much that they can actually do research as the MDT, but individual MDT members use the data to do research. And I think that's, it can't be that, oh, it's the MDT has to do auditing and research. It's the actual research that, I'm not sure if I'm putting this out right, but it's the MDT members individually or as a team with another collaborative can use what they've learned in their MDT or the data that's in there to inform other research.
Nirmala, do you have a view on that? I mean, you're obviously been quite a focus group within BCI around research. I mean, I think you've got a whole research program around that, but the MDT is kind of at the heart of it in some respects.
I guess from what I've learned over the last few years that I've been working, we have 3 MDTs a week at the Breast Cancer Institute. They're very, very busy meetings, and it's very hard to get through the patients that we have on the list actually. So we, but it is also an opportunity where we have all the disciplines coming together, and often we have found that what we've done from our MDTs is to set up a research collaborative, and this is a separate meeting that we have a few times a month to determine what our research priorities should be. So what we've done in our MDTs is to make them the focus of our research program. So they help us to decide what we want to do in terms of our research projects, the program of works for our research collaborative. And that's been very successful because we've identified some real clinical problems that, are research questions that need to be answered. And so we've sort of got 5 or 6 projects that are lined up now, just have stemmed from the MDTs themselves as real-time clinical problems that need solutions, and we've got together as a collaborative, so all the disciplines are represented in the collaborative to try and address these questions. So we found that the MDTs have been really the basis for our research program.
I mean, feel free to ask questions as well. I'll keep my eye out for hands. I mean, I think another interesting thing that's happening at the moment around the research is the big increase in research dollars starting to come towards the centres and the teams, particularly in the T3 space, and I think in the implementation of space. So, I mean, we were both successful this morning in getting a grant across to benchmark across MDTs in data across a number of tumour streams, and so I think, and they're very specifically targeting the MDTs, obviously, to get that to happen. I know there's a couple still from the Cancer Institute here, and I think that's great that we have that kind of drive starting to happen. I mean, Nicole, maybe I could put to you, I mean, you're a researcher that's been working with MDTs. I mean, how do you, I mean, I felt they've been central to what we've been doing as implementation scientists.
I think the fantastic thing we found over the last 5 years is that willingness to engage, and that by asking the MDT groups that we've worked with to actually set the research priorities, that we've taken their lead. So it very much fits with what Nirmala was saying in terms of if you can give the clinicians an opportunity to come together, present them with some of the evidence. So in our case, we took 7 evidence practice gaps in lung cancer and said, out of these gaps, if you had to prioritise what research you wanted to do in terms of implementing change, what would you choose? All 3 teams that we talked to consistently picked the same issues around early diagnosis and trying to help those people who had a suspicious lesion, who might have a lung cancer diagnosis, get more efficient, to be diagnosed more efficiently in a more timely way, to make sure that they were being appropriately referred into specialist lung cancer clinicians who were linked to an MDT. That's really driven our research agenda at Sydney Catalyst as a TCRC for the last 4 years. And out of that, a whole range of other smaller projects have springboarded from that initial discussion that we had with those teams. So the willingness and the generosity of those clinicians has really been quite amazing in building a project or a program of research that would not have come about otherwise.
Because I mean, I think
Just following up, we had before the meeting a little discussion with Nirmala, and maybe we can phrase it back as a question. Some of our biobanking managers are hijacking the MDT to actually raise awareness for the quest, that they want to get biobanking samples for our tissue bank, the Constant Tissue Bank at Liverpool Hospital at the Ingham Institute. And this worked particularly quite well with the head and neck MDTs, and we were just talking before that this also basically builds up a kind of a corporate memory in the MDT. Registrars which might have a faster turnover can be educated again that now the manager, biobanking manager, actually wants to have access to the to search a specimen, and they know then the times when, for example, surgery is happening. So the question is, is this something which could be used by other entities?
I'm happy to say something. Sorry. I'm just going to talk from the breast cancer perspective, and certainly there's a national database that we have here at the WIMA that is maintained, the Australian Breast Cancer Tumour Bank. And we've collected over the years a lot of experience and a lot of samples, over 10,000 samples. And I think the MDT represents a real opportunity for biobanking. It raises awareness of the possibility to have a person from the research team there to tell about the benefits of tumour banking and also to coordinate the process, because it takes a huge amount of coordination between the laboratory, the clinicians, the pathologists in order to get those samples. So you do need to have all members of the MDT team there. And also it's a unique opportunity for us, now that we've collected a whole lot of breast cancer tumour samples, to identify those patients which are your sort of niche patients, like the triple negative breast cancers or specific types of breast cancer where we really want to enrich the database. And the MDT is really the only place where you have the pathologists, the surgeons and all the other people present that can sort of coordinate that sort of activity. So it is really the one place where you will find a fruitful bed for samples collection.
Vincent, you were going to comment?
Yeah, I'll just say that the breast cancer is probably different from our cancer. We have been trying to collaborate with the gastroenterologist to have the liver cancer or liver tissue biobank. Basically, the only one is working is me. I have to call my registrar. None of them is helping. I told them a million times. It's only me contacting the research assistant. If I forgot on that day, it won't happen. So I'll be interested to actually see how we actually make your team actually help out. Because I have threatened them, I've used my courage, I used my stick, it still didn't work. At the end, it's still only me.
Our manager has a very big smile.
Yes, so our biobank team comes to, we've got 3 or 4 members, comes to every MDT meeting, and it's really, as Nirmala said, it's a great opportunity not only to raise awareness for collecting the tissue, but it's actually a fantastic place for the biobank to collect the clinical data and for the research questions to actually come from the questions that come up at the MDT. Yes. So really we're trying to make research a discipline in multidisciplinary care. And so we've got the researchers and the biobankers that are there listening to the questions that the clinicians ask, week after week, those conundrums that they're battling with, and we've turned that into our research questions, just as Nirmala has suggested. So I think I don't see research in the MDT as being separate. I think research as being really part of the MDT.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Lily, but when you've been looking at the teams, that's probably not a consistent feature, though, is it? I mean, I think that, to me, that's one of the markers of a team that's doing well. So I think it was interesting that professional development relating to collaboration point. I thought that could be it could be spurious correlation, but I don't think it is. I think it's a real correlation. I think so. The teams that are able to go beyond just the meeting on the day are probably teams that are functioning well. Would you think that as well?
Absolutely, and we're just trying to get them actual clinical data into the database. They're very keen to go further, but at the moment, a lot of them, I mean, with exceptions obviously, but a lot of them aren't even really collecting the clinical data in a way that they can search it and get information from it.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions. So, I mean, what would be? I mean, what are the pivotal things you think that enable this? So, obviously, Vincent, you're having trouble with trying to get some stuff happening in your team, whereas obviously we've got a well-oiled machine in Fun Fong working really well, and Emily's kind of, I think somewhere on certainly well on that journey, and so and Nirmala, I think BCI actually had that. I mean, what's the key thing that's enabled that? Is it people, or is it money?
Money helps.
Yeah. What was it? You go.
Money does help, but what it is really personality, I suppose. It's the drive, the want to do things for patients, to actually want to improve things, to see the bigger picture, I suppose. And there's not a lot of people that can sit beyond, oh, I haven't got time to do this, or I don't want to do this. But I've found with nearly every MDT I've worked with, if you can find that one person that has that drive and that spark, I suppose, to use their sphere of influence, then that's half your problem, that's half your battle gone, yes, because they'll be there backing you all the way. That's a Quan Fong, that's a Robert Hodge, I can name it a lot. And they've all got that one thing in common, and it's that, for the greater good, so they say. They just have that drive and challenge and can see the benefits, like you said, the research and education and guiding younger clinicians like residents and registrars to aspire to that type of clinician. Yeah.
And I guess I was just thinking about what we've been able to offer the clinicians through our MDT, and there's the usefulness of the meeting, coming up with a recommendation, a little bit of collegiate backup, so you don't feel, for example, pulmonary physicians sometimes get anxious about nodules for all those obvious reasons. It's nice to have an MDT decision or recommendation behind you. And then I've also been able to help junior staff who need research projects. And, I've got data, I've got a database, come and analyse it, and then you've got your project. And so that's been something very concrete I've been able to offer out of the MDT. So I think that what can your MDT do for you might be a thought that we could have in our heads to encourage engagement.
I just wanted to say I agree with you. It does take a strong leadership and somebody with real personality to drive that sort of thing. Some of the things that have worked for us is that we have a separate meeting in addition to our MDT. So every week we have a meeting, and showing them some of the data that comes out of the MDT or some of the data that you have from your clinical unit. It makes it very relevant to them. And finally, to include them in in coming up with the research agenda. So problems that are really directly applicable to them, that will make a difference for them, and including them in that, they get much more motivated to work within the MDT and part of that research framework as well. And finally, the fellows that we have, all of our surgical fellows. So you might struggle, Vincent, with your surgeons, but we find out we have every surgical fellow that goes through it and imaging fellow, pathology fellow, oncology fellow has to do a research project, and it's using the data that we have available. So that helps too.
Nicole then, Vincent.
I was just going to reflect on the idea of biobanking data, clinical registries, and nobody's actually grappled with the topic of qualitative data collection. And I think one of the things coming to working with MDTs as implementation scientists, a lot of the questions that we might start off with as a research question really require qualitative exploration, either with clinicians or with patients, before you can go and do a more detailed analysis of data to answer some of those fundamental questions you have. And I've been really impressed just with particularly the group at RPA who've been willing, and Emily's group at St Vincent's and lung cancer clinicians at Concord have never knocked me back when I said we want to do qualitative research. And a couple of the clinicians I've written papers with over the last couple of years send me these fantastic comments back on manuscripts which say, I'm totally uncomfortable with doing qualitative research and I don't understand what it is that you're doing, but I love it and I'm happy to be engaged and it's opened up a new world to me, and those sorts of comments around, this is not something that I have any training in, I have no exposure to it, and I have no experience in the research methodologies or the theoretical frameworks that you bring to it, but I'm willing to go on that journey with you. And it's really encouraging. And I love getting that feedback from the clinicians. It's not just, they don't want to just see the numbers on the page. They want to hear about the stories that you can tell them from the patient interviews or from the clinician. Oh, this is going dead. The clinician interviews that you're doing. And that's just, I guess, a word of encouragement that we've had that experience to share with the people working in more the implementation side of things.
I think it's important to have a leader with some resources. I mean, one of the leader MDT that I went to, before we start, years ago, that the Professor Jacob George and I, we just sit down and say we need some practice guidelines on how we look after liver tumors. So we spend, with the radiologists, 3 of us, we sit down to work out that a guideline that 3 of us agree, and then we send it to all the members so that everyone actually know when the different stage of the tumor is how we like it to be managed. And I guess it's, there's always different opinion, patient might be slightly different, but in general, it work well. But when I try to do the same thing in other cancer group, it doesn't work. Because there are times that, the chair, I mean, some of them, I don't even know who the chair is. The chair doesn't turn up. And then when you challenge a chair that we want to do a research project, there's one time that I think what the data that Minnie got is actually very good. There's one 3 years ago, I applied for ethics to just try to get a checklist to when the patient need to be added on the MDT list. There's a checklist that the clinician need to be there. We need some basic demographic, including the age and the sex, and then like whether they need to look at pathology or radiology. Just that list. We get ethics approved, and we want this. And I told everyone. And then when we first want to start it, they say, "Oh, we don't want this. It doesn't work." We already told them. And now then we have to cancel our project and tell ethics, "I'm sorry, we can't start the project." They're just really bad. But I think with the data that Winnie has, I should have done that first to actually tell them. People actually think that the MDT is not working. So then we can tell them we want to change it. But it's just intrinsically, I didn't think it works. So I tried to do a project to help them, and it didn't work. I just didn't have the ultimate buy-in. I mean, they have the buy-in at the superficial level, but when I want them to change, they didn't want to change. They didn't want to fill in the form.
I will. I mean, I guess the bit, as I'm going walking to linear, I guess the bit that staggers me is the heterogeneity of all of this. I mean, if this was the military, we would lose every battle. We had every single team doing things in totally different ways, and you move from one team to the next, and one team's got a leader, the other doesn't. I mean, it's kind of staggering in this day and age that we've got such enormous heterogeneity and such an incredibly important part and such varied resources. I mean, the military has different leaders, and they're not all robots, but every team has a certain, it's just remarkable when you reflect on this.
No, it was just sort of emphasising that often when we listen, we're listening to teams that are really performing well and have really good leaders because they're the ones that we asked to talk. The dilemma that I face is how do we pull the others up, and it's not easy. And certainly I'll talk to Vincent about trying to help, but there's a definite split between ones that perform and have good leadership, or people that and others.
But this is again showing my ignorance, but it's related to what Vincent and Nicole were saying. Is there anything mandated that clinicians that work in the hospital, A, have to attend the MDT, and B, is there any standard or code of behaviour that's required so that everybody gets a voice and so that the loudest person doesn't determine the treatment?
So we have a terms of reference for our MDT program, was written by the cancer services, I think there's going to be heterogeneity across the state and across the country on this, but our terms of reference has a very clear, well, I think probably not recommendations, they're instructions about how the chairing should run, how the meeting should run, how everybody should behave, and we saw from PMC that comment on professional behaviour. And I looked at that on the slide and thought, do we really need? And I thought, yeah, we do. And I could talk for an hour about learning how to be a chair for the last 10 years, but there's all sorts of things you learn about how to deal with a room full of egocentric doctors. I think most MDTs probably work very well, but I think that it has been helpful to me to have the terms of reference. I don't look at it very often, but it backs me up, and I think that concept about the chair having authority from a program is really good, because sometimes you do have to tell people to be quiet, and they might be older than you and more senior to you, but you do have to do that and insist upon everybody look at the recommendations and make sure you've got consensus or you record dissent. You do have to be quite strong as a chair.
And I found in a lot of the MDTs I've been associated with, and the PMC is not separate, they have their bad days. And with that strategic planning meeting, a lot of it was centred on behaviours. And that's why we came up with a charter. So they're reminded of their charter, that they've signed on to this charter of how they should behave, because we put it out every month or 2 months, and they say, did we abide by the charter in this meeting? And that's helped a lot. And you notice that when things start going down again, you bring that charter back out, and then the behaviour starts coming up.
It might be normative discussion. I have a 12-year-old daughter about the charters I had in their classroom. Anyway, that's another point. So, Christine, you had a comment, did you? Did you have that?
Oh, it was just a comment really about systems, and it was about what Vincent was saying, bringing people along. And what Emily was saying about data, the power of data, if you don't have it, you don't know what you're missing. So I think having a system like Queensland, it's so powerful, even if you have a great leader, a good system will bring people along.
I totally agree, and that's the whole basis of what we're trying to do with Nirmala and Breast Cancer Institute. Great, Suzanne, I was hoping somebody from the Cancer Institute would pipe up.
I think this is why we decided to have our workshop next week, because it's going to...
we've got to get you to stand up, so this is your segue, do it quick.
Okay, so it's going to feed on from what's been discussed today, and it's going to allow that opportunity to start discussing the terms of reference and the criteria and what is making a good MDT and what is not making a good MDT. So Vincent, where you're saying you've got a really great one and then the others aren't functioning well, the whole purpose of the workshop next week is to get that communities of practice together, formulate it so that you can share the ideas, where Emily, you've got some great ideas with your MDTs, and then Vincent, you've got some great ideas with some of yours that are functioning well. Pulling those together, obviously MDTs are different, the different tumour streams and the different resources that are available at each hospital. So it's not going to be where we talk about everyone must do it this way. It's you know what, I can really pull this and take this back to our MDT, or we've just been to America and I've just found out that this is something that's going to be great, let's share it. So it is developing that communities of practice where you can start sharing, finding out what works, what doesn't work, redefining your MDT a little bit and making them work a bit better. So I'm not sure if you're coming, Vincent, or if you've got people that would want to come. It's a very hands-on workshop, and then we've got the evening session. So eventually we'll come down to some key priority areas that we will push forward through as a communities of practice.
Thanks, Suzanne. I mean, and I do think the work that Lynn is doing really helps with this too, and just at least getting everybody honoured lead chart. I really do. I think that's just to show that and just sharing. It just staggers me how many times people aren't talking to each other around all of this. So, any other questions? We're pretty well nearly at the end there, I think. Any final comments from anybody on the panel? Wish to make? Nirmala?
Well,
Sorry,
data's extremely challenging. I mean, we're working with Tim. We're at the inception of trying to make an electronic medical record that's specific for breast cancer that we can use at the bedside for patients and still collect structured data from, and through the MDT. But there are so many data sources, and it is incredible how many different databases are just present within our local health district, from public to private to different places. It's really a challenge to try and get some of that data together. But if we could do a system like what you've done in Queensland, the limit of what you can do in terms of research, or even just qualitative research or anything is unbelievable. Even just for your basic KPI reporting, we're finding it. Even basic things like that are important. Very, very difficult to do at present. Yeah.
Okay. So, any other final comments? Nicole, you have to, no obligation, but
I'll just do
good.
Because I agree. I can't remember your name from the Cancer Institute.
Suzanne.
I totally agree. It's all individual. You can't tell MDTs how to do it. Even putting in terms of reference, when I've done it with MDTs, I've let them do the wording. I've given broad, suggestions of what to write, and then they don't usually get looked at until you sort of tell them again. Remember, we did that once.
Well, thanks. And I think that's where my military analogy fails entirely. So nothing with the teams are a group of high-performing professionals that don't really answer to anybody in many respects, and certainly don't answer to the chair, I don't think. I mean, there's no obligation. Obviously, in the military, you have a hierarchy. If you do something down the bottom where you're different, then you can get your court-martialed or whatever you might happen, but it obviously doesn't happen here. So I think that is that negotiation you've got to do, and every team's different. But I mean, for me, I think there's some just fundamental things we've got to sort out, like you're saying. If we can't sort the plumbing out to have that stuff sorted, then we're never going to have a functioning. It's going to make it so hard for the leaders or all the teams that need a bit more help to kind of come up. So anyway, but we made it to 5 o'clock, which is when we say I had 15 minutes to sum up, which I'm not going to do. Can't really sum this up. So it's been really enjoyable today, and I thank everybody for their participation. I certainly learned a lot and heard things again, and it's valuable. I mean, I hope people do want to keep talking about this journey, about what the role of the MDT is, because I think that's the next kind of wave. And obviously we've got to learn from our colleagues in Queensland and other places about doing that. And anyway, I'd just like to thank my panellists formally for participating today and being such willing people to stand up there and talk. Thank you.